Okay, so to continue with Serkong Rinpoche's advice for daily practice, he said monastics and lay practitioners must strive to put the Dharma into practice as much as they can, especially those of you who are ordained, who have turned your minds away from thoughts of being a householder and having worldly things. It is extremely important to practice well. It is also important for you to be harmonious with each other, to live in peace and friendliness with each other. So why do we ordain? So that we can practice. If we don't want to practice, then there's no reason to be ordained. And he's saying here how important it is too, not only for us to practice, but for us to be harmonious with each other, because I mean, if we're all trying to practice to then be quarrelsome and disagreeable, kind of is the opposite of what we're trying to do to tame our mind, isn't it? Then instead of cultivating peace and forgiveness and compassion, we're cultivating anger and resentment and competition. So that just doesn't make any sense. And then also, the lay community looks at the monastics as an example of how to be. And although we certainly aren't perfect, we should really try to practice. Otherwise, the lay people are going to look and say, these people are more angry and quarrelsome than all the people I work with, And if that's true, then it's really rather disgraceful, isn't it? Yeah, so it's important for us to practice well. And things come up and people get angry, but that's quite normal. But the big thing is to work it out when it happens. That's what makes the difference. Okay. Furthermore, you should have a wise teacher to study with. This too is a result of your previous collection of merit. While your spiritual mentor is still present, take advantage of this opportunity and receive teachings. It is not sufficient to have an intellectual understanding or to know about the Dharma, but you actually have to put it into practice. At the time of the Buddha, when he gave the first teaching of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, he said, "This is the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the cause of suffering, the noble truth of cessation, and the noble truth of the path." Hearing just these few words of teachings, people put them into practice and gain the greatest of insights. So he's saying that while your spiritual mentors are still alive and you still have access to them, then it's very important to take that opportunity and to listen to teachings. And so you'll find when His Holiness teaches, we're all going to DC soon, that you will find even the highest Geshis and Lamas coming to listen to His Holiness teach the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, which they themselves can teach. Why? Because every time you hear a teaching, you hear something new that you didn't hear before. Okay? So we should try to avoid the mind that says, oh, well, I've heard that before, it's not interesting, I want something new and dynamic, or, just kind of taking the presence of our spiritual teachers for granted. We should, really put our energy out to try and receive the teachings while we can. Yeah. And then once we've received the teachings, it's not sufficient just to have an intellectual understanding. Of course, we try and get the intellectual understanding first, because without it, we won't know how to meditate correctly. But just having that understanding isn't sufficient. We have to understand the words and concepts and then try and really relate them to our experience and integrate them with our mind so that we actually start seeing things in a completely different way. And that comes through repetition and practice. And what he was saying here about the disciples at the time of the Buddha, they just heard a few words and they gained realizations. That's not because of magic. It's because in their previous life, They heard the teachings, they thought about the teachings and gained the intellectual understanding, and then they began to meditate on them. So because they already had a lot of familiarity with the teachings, then when they were born at the time of the Buddha and he just said a little bit, it was like, wow, they got it right away. Okay? So if we practice like that, just repeatedly putting this into our mind stream and steering our minds in that way, then who knows, maybe at the time of Maitreya Buddha, we'll be born as Maitreya's disciples, and he'll say, this is the truth of suffering, the cause, the cessation and the path, and bang, we'll get it, okay? But hearing many teachings and not putting any of them into practice is a big fault. All you have done is heard a lot, but you haven't really done anything with it. So it's like having a lot of medicine, but you don't take any of it. Okay. Whatever teachings you hear or study, you should immediately put into practice and meditate on them. Don't think that meditation and hearing are two separate things. That you hear a lot of teachings, but when you meditate, you put them to one side and meditate on something else. This isn't at all the way to practice. Rather, the powers of hearing and meditating should go together, reinforcing each other. Your hearing or contemplating on the teachings should be as extensive. Your thinking or contemplating on the teachings should be as extensive as what you have heard, and your meditation should be as extensive as what you have thought about. This is the way to practice, and it initially depends on hearing teachings. Okay, so when he's saying, whatever you hear, you should also meditate on. This is because it seems like some people, they may study, let's say, the philosophical teachings, but when it comes time to meditate, they put those aside and they do visualizations and mantra, but don't integrate the perspective of emptiness that they learned in the philosophical teachings with the tantra that they're practicing. Or people, may study the Lam Rim, but again, when it comes to meditation, then they meditate on, having a blank mind or something like that. Or they do visualizations and mantra, but again, without really understanding refuge or bodhicitta or renunciation. So he's really emphasizing here that whatever you study, don't think of it as this is just intellectual information, but my practice is something different. But take what you hear and and study, and then think about it, and think deeply about it, and then when you've thought about it or contemplated it, then meditate on it, and then integrate it with whatever other practices you're doing. Okay? So there shouldn't be a disconnect between our study and our meditation. Yeah. Because if there is, then then things aren't coming together well, are they? Yeah. We study about compassion, but when we meditate, we're trying to perceive the clear nature of the mind, but we never study anything about the clear nature of the mind, so we don't know what to look for. Yeah? And then we study about compassion, but we don't have any because we've never meditated on it. So to really try to make our practice very integrated. So he says the practitioners of Tibet have practiced hearing, thinking, and meditating together. They reach completion in their meditative practice through cultivating extensive hearing and contemplation. Therefore, practice these three inseparably. Okay? So here he's talking especially about what's called the three understandings or the three wisdoms that arise first from hearing or studying, second from thinking, reflecting, contemplating, and third from meditating. So again, saying that the accomplished practitioners have done all three of those. Okay? So really emphasizing that if you want to meditate, you need to study. Otherwise, you don't know how to meditate or what to meditate on. Because meditating isn't just sitting there. Yeah? So you need to know how to steer your mind, what to do with your mind, what is a proper object of meditation. And then you also need to learn when you know, you have interferences like falling asleep or getting distracted, you know, how to deal with those. And you learn that through studying the teachings. Okay? So all of this fits together.